My sister announced her pregnancy the same weekend I got engaged. I remember thinking it was a coincidence. My mother called me 3 days later to say the baby shower and my bridal shower needed to be combined because the family couldn't afford two separate events. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, and honestly, a baby is more important than a ring, so we'll make sure the focus stays where it belongs. She said it the way people say the weather is nice. Flat. Certain. Final. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long moment, looking out the window at the parking lot of my apartment complex. Then I picked it back up and texted my fiancé 4 words. It's starting again. He texted back immediately. What do you need? I typed, time. Have you ever been made to feel like your happiness was an inconvenience to your own family? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have been the family's invisible scaffolding, the structure that holds everything up, but that nobody thinks about until something cracks. My sister is 3 years older than me. Her name is Dana, and she has been the sun in my parents' solar system since the day she was born. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. Clinical, accurate, based on evidence collected over decades. The evidence started early. When I was 12 and Dana was 15, I saved 4 months of birthday money to buy a specific art kit I'd had bookmarked on my mother's laptop for half a year. The day I finally ordered it, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and explained, gently, that Dana was going through a hard time socially at school and needed something to lift her spirits. She slid the art kit across the table toward me. She'd already wrapped it. She said I was mature enough to understand. She said Dana needed it more. I understood. I just also understood something she didn't intend to teach me, that my needs had a conditional ceiling, and my sister's had none. I stopped asking for things after that. Instead, I started doing. I got a job at 16, tutored classmates for cash at 17, graduated early, and put myself through a state university on scholarships and nights I don't fully remember because I was working through all of them. My parents came to my graduation. My mother cried. My father said he was proud. 2 weeks later, when Dana got a certificate from a 6-week online course in interior design, they threw her a dinner party. I told myself it didn't matter. I had built something real. I had a career, a savings account with actual numbers in it, and eventually a man named Theo who looked at me like I was the most interesting person in every room we entered together. Theo is a structural engineer. He's quiet in the way that competent people often are. He doesn't announce himself. He just solves things. My family found him underwhelming from the start. He drove a practical car. He didn't talk about money in ways that impressed them. My mother once described him to her friend on the phone, not knowing I was in the next room, as perfectly fine, but not exactly what you'd hope for. Dana's husband, by contrast, drove a leased Range Rover and talked loudly about deals he was working on. My parents thought he was extraordinary. The fact that he had been fired from 3 jobs in 4 years didn't dim that perception at all. In my family's cosmology, performance mattered more than results. When Theo proposed to me on a Tuesday evening in our apartment, no restaurant, no audience, just him on one knee next to the bookshelf where I kept all my favorite novels, I sobbed in a way I hadn't since I was a child. Not because of the ring, because of how quiet it was, how entirely mine. I called my parents that night. My mother said, "Oh, wonderful," and then immediately asked if Dana had heard yet because she didn't want Dana to feel overshadowed given the timing of everything. The timing of everything being Dana's pregnancy, announced 3 days prior. I should have understood in that moment exactly where this was heading. Instead, I gave them the benefit of the doubt for 4 more months, while the wedding planning turned into a slow and systematic dismantling of everything I wanted. The venue I'd chosen was too expensive, they said, even though they had never offered to pay for a single item. The date conflicted with the trip Dana and her husband had already loosely planned. So can I consider moving it? The color palette I'd selected was lovely, but might clash with what Dana was thinking for the nursery reveal, which she wanted to post the same month. Was there any flexibility? I moved the date. I switched the venue to something smaller. I changed the color palette. I told myself I was being reasonable. I told myself this is what adults do. Then came the Sunday dinner in March. It was raining. One of those cold gray rains that makes the whole world look like a waiting room. I drove 40 minutes to my parents' house, parked behind my sister's Range Rover, and walked in carrying a pan of the roasted vegetables I'd been asked to bring. By the time I set the pan on the counter, they were already deep in conversation at the table. Dana was describing in vivid detail the venue she and my mother had toured that morning, not for anything I was aware was being planned. For Dana's baby shower. The venue was Haverford Garden House. I recognized the name because it was the first venue I had looked at for my own wedding before my mother suggested I scale back. I sat down. I put my napkin in my lap. I said nothing. Then my mother looked up and said, almost brightly, "Oh, Claire, we've been meaning to talk to you. The shower situation is getting complicated. We think the most practical thing is to move your bridal shower to the backyard here, keep it small, and give Haverford to Dana. A baby shower needs more room for the gifts anyway." My father nodded in the way he always nodded, which was less agreement and more the practiced movement of a man who had long ago outsourced his opinions. Dana didn't look at me. She rearranged the silverware beside her plate. I picked up my fork. I said, "Okay." They visibly relaxed. My mother smiled. My father reached for the bread. What none of them knew was that Theo wasn't in the parking lot of his office at that moment, where I'd told them he had to work on a Sunday. He was 45 minutes away at a meeting I had asked him not to mention yet, signing the final paperwork on a contract that would make him the lead structural engineer on a development project that included, among its various holdings, the company that owned Haverford Garden House. And they certainly didn't know what I did for work. My family knew I worked in HR. That was what I told them years ago when I was explaining my job title in terms that would end the conversation quickly. It was technically adjacent to the truth. I am the Regional Compliance Director for a mid-sized hospitality group. I oversee policy, internal investigations, and when necessary, I handle situations where the company's interests have been quietly undermined from the inside. Dana's husband worked in that company's sales division. I want to be precise about when I found out and what I did with it, because the sequence matters. I found out in February, 6 weeks before that Sunday dinner, when a name appeared in a routine audit report that crossed my desk. The audit had been flagged by our finance team for irregular entertainment expense submissions, dinners, client gifts, event reservations, all charged to the company account, all lacking proper documentation. The name attached to the account was familiar because I had sat across from it at Thanksgiving for 4 years. I disclosed the conflict of interest to our general counsel the same afternoon. Per company protocol, I was formally recused from any direct investigative role. An outside compliance firm was brought in to handle the case independently. I provided my disclosure documentation, confirmed I had no prior knowledge, and was instructed to maintain confidentiality until the review was complete. I maintained it completely. I did not tell Theo. I did not tell my parents. I did not. When my sister sat across from me talking about Haverford Garden House, say a single word. I just picked up my fork and said, "Okay." The weeks between that dinner and the baby shower were a particular kind of quiet. The kind that sits in your chest. I went to work. I came home. I helped Theo review the engineering specs on the development project in the evenings, making notes in the margins and my handwriting while he explained load tolerances and material grades. I liked listening to him explain things. He never made you feel small for not already knowing. My mother texted periodically with shower updates. The floral arrangements at Haverford were stunning. The caterer Dana had chosen was the same one a celebrity had used for a party in the area. The guest list had grown to 60 people. There was going to be a custom sign. I responded to each text with a variation of, "That sounds lovely." I meant none of it. I also didn't need to, because what I actually felt was something harder to name. Not anger exactly, more like the focused stillness you get when you've been moving towards something for a long time and the destination is finally in sight. 3 days before the shower, my sister called me. "I need you to help coordinate," she said, skipping hello entirely. "Mom has a lot going on and the florist is being impossible about the delivery window. Can you just handle that side of things?" I was in the middle of reviewing a document on my laptop. I didn't close it. "I have a lot going on too," I said. "Claire," she made my name sound like a sigh. "This is my baby shower. It's kind of a big deal." "I know what it is, Dana. Mom said you'd be weird about it." A pause. "Look, I know the bridal shower thing wasn't ideal, but you said it was fine. You can't keep punishing everyone for something you already agreed to." I looked at the document on my laptop. It was the preliminary findings report from the outside compliance firm. It had come to me that morning in a sealed PDF, flagged for HR records. I had opened it, read the summary, closed it, and sat very still for about 2 minutes. The total in unauthorized expense submissions attached to Dana's husband's account was just over $41,000. That was the preliminary number, pending full audit completion. I'll handle the florist, I said. She exhaled. Thank you. See, that wasn't hard. I don't think she heard the silence on my end before I said it. The kind of silence that is actually a decision being made. The morning of Dana's shower was the first genuinely warm day of the spring. I put on a pale green dress I bought for myself and pearl earrings Theo had given me for my birthday. I drove to Haverford Garden House and parked in the main lot. I checked in with the event coordinator, a woman named Priya who knew me only as a guest. I found my seat, which was 2 tables back from the front, next to an aunt I rarely spoke to. The venue was beautiful. I'll give them that. The flowers were extravagant in the way Dana had always wanted things. Abundant, a little overwhelming, expensive looking. The custom sign was large and hung with ribbon in the exact shade of yellow she'd specified. My mother floated between tables with the expression she wore at her happiest, which was the expression of a woman whose vision for her family was being realized exactly as planned. Dana sat at the head table in a white dress and accepted gifts and compliments in the gracious, slightly regal way she had always received things. Like they were expected. Like the world was simply delivering what had always been coming to her. My phone buzzed at 11:14 in the morning. It was a message from our general counsel. The outside compliance firm had finalized their report that morning and submitted it to the executive team. HR records would receive the formal documentation by end of day. The employee in question had been notified and a meeting was scheduled for Monday. I put my phone back in my purse. I folded my hands in my lap. At 11:32, Dana's husband arrived, which was unusual because it had been billed as a women's event. He came in through the garden door in a blazer, scanning the room until he found my mother, who waved him over. I watched them have a quiet, urgent conversation near the dessert table. My mother's expression shifted from celebratory to something more careful. Her eyes crossed the room briefly and found me, then moved away. At 11:45, my mother appeared at my chair. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" she said. We walked out to the side corridor near the coat room, where the noise of the party became a muffled hum behind us. She folded her arms. "Rick is saying there's some kind of HR situation at his company. He got called in for a meeting Monday and he's very upset. He seems to think HR initiated something. Is that something you would know anything about?" I looked at her. "You know I can't discuss personnel matters, Mom. He's your brother-in-law. That's actually the reason I can't discuss it more than anyone else." I recused myself entirely and disclosed the relationship immediately. "That's the correct procedure." She stared at me. "You recused yourself, so you knew." I knew there was a review. I did exactly what I was required to do, and I had no involvement after that point. An outside firm handled everything. "Claire," she lowered her voice, "Dana is pregnant. Rick is their income. If something happens to his job right now, it will be because of decisions he made, not because of anything I did." She looked at me the way she had looked at me my whole life in these moments, like I was being difficult. Like my adherence to something as abstract as correctness was a personal inconvenience she hadn't budgeted for. "I just need you to understand," she said, "that your sister needs stability right now. The family needs you to be supportive." I thought about the art kit. I thought about the graduation dinner they hadn't thrown. I thought about Haverford Garden House and the bridal shower in the backyard they'd never offered to decorate. I thought about $41,000 in unauthorized charges that I had not reported, had not initiated, had not in any way manufactured, that had simply existed, documented and waiting, because the person committing them had assumed no one was watching. "I am being supportive," I said. I coordinated the florist. She had no response to that. I walked back into the shower, ate a small plate of the food, said goodbye to my aunt, hugged Dana with genuine warmth, and left at 12:30. On the way home, I called Theo. He was at the development site. I could hear wind in the background and the faint clang of something structural being tested. "How was it?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "How's the site?" "Good. Actually, the Haverford property finalized this morning. We own it outright as of 10 o'clock. I was quiet for a moment, watching the road. "You never raised your voice," Theo said, and I knew he meant something larger than the morning. That's what I keep thinking about. Through all of it, you never once raised your voice. "I didn't need to," I said. The Monday meeting happened without me. The outside compliance firm presented their findings to the executive team directly. Rick was terminated. The company declined to pursue criminal charges in exchange for a full repayment agreement, a decision I had no input on and did not contest. The amount on the repayment schedule was $41,200. Dana called me that afternoon. I answered on the third ring. She didn't speak at first. I could hear her breathing. "Did you know?" she finally asked. I knew there was a compliance review. I disclosed the conflict of interest and removed myself immediately. "That's all I can tell you." "That's all you can tell me?" She laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that means something is funny. "You know this is going to affect us for years. The repayment alone, and with the baby." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry the timing is hard. Are you?" A pause. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty convenient." I thought carefully about what to say. I decided on the truth, which was also the simplest thing. "Dana, I found a name in a report. It was his name. I told my general counsel that same day, and I never touched the case again. I did the thing a person is supposed to do. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because not doing it would have meant choosing your comfort over the correct thing to do. And I spent my whole life making that choice in reverse, choosing your comfort and everyone else's over what was correct for me. I'm done doing that." She hung up. My mother didn't call for 11 days. When she did, she said she hoped I was proud of myself. I said I was, actually, and I meant it without any sharpness. She hung up too. My bridal shower was held in our backyard on a Saturday in May. Theo's mother and my 3 closest friends and my aunt, who always sat next to me. There were 22 people total. Someone brought a hand-painted banner. The food was from a barbecue place we loved. It lasted 4 hours, and I don't think I stopped smiling once. My wedding was in July. Theo and I had moved the date back to our original choice, the one I'd changed to accommodate Dana's loosely planned trip, which had not, in the end, happened. We got married in the evening under string lights at a venue that Theo technically owned a partial stake in through his development firm. The irony of that was not lost on me. The venue coordinator, Priya, was the same woman who had checked me in at the baby shower. She remembered me. We laughed about it briefly before the ceremony. My parents did not come to the wedding. They sent a card that said they needed time and space and hoped I understood. I understood completely. Dana came. I had not expected her to, and when I saw her arrive with her husband, who had found a new job and seemed smaller in some way I couldn't name, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still clenched. She hugged me before the ceremony and didn't say anything, which was the right choice. I hugged her back. She held on for a moment longer than I expected. The baby. My niece was born in September. I went to see her when she was 4 days old. I sat in the hospital room and held her and looked at her face, which was new and had no history and was not responsible for any of it. My mother was there. We didn't speak much. At one point, she sat down next to me while I was holding the baby and said quietly, "I didn't always get it right with you." I looked at my niece's face. "No," I said, "but I turned out okay." She nodded once, tightly, and I understood that was as far as we were going to get that day. Maybe ever. And I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that it was enough. Not because it resolved anything, but because I no longer needed resolution from her to feel whole. That was something I had built myself, the same way I had built everything else. Quietly, without acknowledgement, in rooms where nobody was watching. Theo donated a portion of his stake in the Haverford Property Project to a nonprofit that runs transitional housing programs for young women aging out of the foster care system. It was his idea. I signed the paperwork in our kitchen on a Tuesday evening after dinner, and when I looked up at him across the table, I thought, this is it. This is what a family that sees you looks like. They tried to make me small my whole life. They needed me to be small so that someone else could look larger by comparison. But the thing about scaffolding is that once you stop holding other people's structures up, you find out exactly how much you were capable of building on your own. I built something they'll never have to take from me, because it was never theirs to begin with. There's a version of this story where I stay angry, where I nurse the resentment the way you nurse a wound you keep reopening, carefully, habitually, convinced that the pain is proof the injury was real. I understand that version. I lived adjacent to it for a long time, but here's what I actually believe, having come out the other side of it. The way people treat you is a document. It records in real time what they think you're worth. And for most of my life, I made the mistake of trying to edit that document through accommodation, softening myself, shrinking my expectations, trading what I wanted for the temporary comfort of keeping the peace. It never worked. Not once. Because you cannot negotiate your way into being valued by people who have already decided you aren't. What changed for me wasn't a single moment. It was a slow accumulation of clarity. Every time I moved a date or changed a color palette or handed something over without being asked twice, I thought I was being gracious. What I was actually doing was confirming for everyone around me that my needs were the flexible ones, that I was the variable in the equation they could adjust when the math didn't work out for someone else. The moment I stopped being adjustable, everything shifted. Not because I became difficult, but because I became fixed. I knew what I would and wouldn't do, and I stopped apologizing for the difference. The hardest part wasn't the conflict, it was tolerating being misread. When you stop bending, the people who depended on your flexibility will call it stubbornness. They'll call it selfishness. They'll say you've changed, which is technically accurate and entirely the point. What they mean is that you've stopped being useful in the specific way they needed you to be. That is not a criticism worth carrying. Integrity is not a dramatic gesture. It is not the moment you expose someone in a room full of witnesses, though sometimes it looks that way from the outside. It is the quiet decision, made in an ordinary moment with no audience, to do the correct thing even when the correct thing costs you something. I found a name in a report. I disclosed it immediately. I stepped away. That's all it was. One decision, made cleanly, in about 30 seconds. The consequences were not mine to engineer. They were simply the natural result of choices that had already been made long before I was involved. That's the part people miss about cause and effect. They imagine accountability arrives from outside, like a verdict handed down. But most of the time, it is just the ordinary machinery of actions meeting their outcomes. My sister's husband made a series of choices over 3 years. Those choices produced a result. I was incidental to the process. What I refused to do was become the thing that interrupted it, the accommodation that allowed the machinery to keep running without consequence. I think about my niece sometimes, about who she'll be watching as she grows up. I hope she watches her aunt, who built something real and held on to it. I hope she learns early that the people who see you clearly are worth more than 100 who need you small. I hope she never hands over what's hers and calls it generosity. I know what I'm worth. I built the evidence myself, over years, in rooms where nobody was watching. That knowledge is the one thing that was never theirs to take. Because I never offered it.